So I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about our genes and survival genes and what this has meant for us over time. And it's a little bit of a different view than you may have heard before about rare disease. So I want to thank you for joining me for this sort of exploration about how we look at these kinds of things. So this is going to be a reading from my book. It's just come out in February, called When the Baby is Not Okay, Hopes and Genes. And as an author, I'm a geneticist, but also the mother of two who have PKU. And so PKU is a rare condition. And when we have this in the family, sometimes we wonder about the rare disease genes and what they mean for us and for our humankind. And I wanted to share a little bit tonight about survival genes. So the book has 24 chapters, and the 12th chapter is called Survival Genes. And that's the one I'm going to read a bit from tonight as soon as we get. Good genes and bad genes are a kind of myth. What genes are and what they are not are often obscured by a lack of accurate information. They're very, very small, but genes are physical things. Genes don't have a soul any more than a single cell does, or a hand or a foot or an eyeball does. As author Haruki Murakami wrote in his novel 1Q84 in 2009, genes don't think about what constitutes good or evil. They don't care whether we're happy or unhappy. Most genes are a spectrum. They come in variations along a continuum, something like the continuous wavelengths of light that make up all the colors of a rainbow. Being a PKU carrier, so having a rare health condition like PKU in the family like I do, having a version of a gene that's less common or unusual or different isn't necessarily a bad thing, not something to regret. And that's because having one of these genes can be life-saving as an advantage in certain environments. Surprising, right? The advantage of having different genes is most noticeable during catastrophic events like epidemics and famines. During rapid and extreme changes in their environments, when people didn't have time to adapt through behavior and choices, their survival relied on what they already had inside them, and that's their genes. Potentially lethal toxin exposure and deadly infectious diseases are two of the prime epic threats to human survival, and certain rare genes have helped people live through those conditions over many thousands of years. These include gene variants that can cause sickle cell trait and cystic fibrosis, and PKU. I don't know why people don't talk more about this fascinating history when genetic screening comes up during pregnancy or family planning, or even during genetics education. It would be good to know. Whether a gene is a health concern or a survival advantage depends on the historical time frame and the geographic location. This is reviewed by researcher Isabel Withrock and other scientists in the journal Genes and Diseases. Having rare genes in the population could very well become important for the future of humans on planet Earth. A classic first example, I have three examples to share, and a classic first example is having the gene for sickle cell trait and surviving a rampant infectious disease, the infamous malaria. Malaria may have killed as many as 50 to 60 billion people. Out of the total 117 billion people ever born throughout all of human history, science writer John Whitfield estimated in his article, Portrait of a Serial Killer, published in the Nature journal in 2002. That's exactly half of all the humans who ever lived since time began. During the year 2022 alone, malaria caused 249 million infections in 85 countries worldwide, so it's still a huge concern. In the US where I live, malaria is still around, although it's less common. It causes about 2,000 cases per year. The name for malaria comes from the Italian mal for bad and aria for air. People used to believe that the disease was caused by the foul smell around stagnant water. Now health workers know it's actually transmitted by tiny parasites that are passed on to humans by mosquito bites. In real life, some mosquitoes living near water are loaded with these tiny parasites, and they're called Plasmodium. The parasites can get into a person's bloodstream through a mosquito bite. Once inside, the parasites cause disease in human blood, liver, and brain, and that's malaria. However, a person born with one copy of the sickle cell gene has what's called sickle cell trait, and although they're a carrier for sickle cell, like I'm a carrier for PKU, I have it in my family, the sickle cell trait is controlled by one recessive gene. It's called HBB, and it makes an altered form of hemoglobin, the protein that in the blood that carries vital oxygen around our bodies. People who have sickle cell trait are less likely to get malaria in the first place. And if they do get malaria, they'll have fewer parasites during the infection. More importantly, though, they're much more likely to outlive the infection. When parasites infect a blood cell, sickle cell hemoglobin slows or stops them from multiplying and flooding the blood with new parasites. So this gene, having this gene, carrying this gene, saves lives. A person born with two copies of the sickle cell gene, similar to PKU, if you have two copies of a gene that causes PKU, a person born with two copies of sickle cell gene will have sickle cell disease. It can lead to having a lifelong blood condition and an increased risk of stroke and periods of pain and fatigue for many people. In the US, where I live, from 1 to 13 babies in every 10,000 have sickle cell disease. In areas where malaria outbreaks happen frequently, the sickle cell gene runs in more families than in other locations. It's most common in people who have Asian Indian, African, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, Central and South American ancestry. Up to 40% of all the people who live in certain parts of India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Saudi Arabia still inherit sickle cell trait. It provided a selective advantage through a very long history of living side by side with infected mosquitoes. Joel Burville, a talented young physician known as the medical mythbuster, recently highlighted the role of sickle cell trait in malaria resistance. Burville debunked the myth that it's a black disease in a recent post on LinkedIn, where he's a top voice in health. In reality, sickle cell is a living around mosquitoes disease because it helps us survive. A second rare disease survival story that I find fascinating and want to share is the surprising survival advantage that can come along with the gene for cystic fibrosis. During times of cholera pandemics, this becomes important. Cholera, you might not hear about as much these days, but cholera is a contagious and often fatal disease caused by bacterial infections. Waves of death from cholera have taken millions of lives, and cholera epidemics have shaped human history over the last 2 centuries. Genetic analysis shows that more families from areas where cholera was endemic have cystic fibrosis than those living in other places. Now, cystic fibrosis, you may have heard of because it's one of the most common inherited health conditions that we know of as far as genetic conditions. In the United States, about 10 million people, or 1 in 30, are known to be affected. And carriers. It's caused by a gene called CFTR and is carried as a recessive trait in many families, the same way PKU is carried in my family. Having 2 copies of the variant gene for cystic fibrosis that can cause the illness, one from each parent, can lead to an extra thickened mucus in the lungs and a lifelong health condition. But having 1 copy of the gene, the CFTR, may actually protect people from cholera. Though cholera infection can lead to severe diarrhea and dehydration, that's less likely for people who carry 1 copy of the variant CFTR gene. Researchers suspect this may be because it regulates how fluids go in and out of cells through cell membranes, helping prevent the fatal dehydration. The year 2024 saw the world's 7th cholera pandemic. Tens of thousands still lose their lives to cholera yearly, and millions are infected. So surviving cholera may well continue to be important in the future. And the third story relates to not infectious epidemics or pandemics, but catastrophic famines. These have been changing human history since records began. Famines continue to this day, although they're not as often publicized as pandemics. While millions die of starvation during famines, others suffer from toxins in spoiled foods that they eat out of desperation. These same toxins also cause higher risks of miscarriage. So mold toxins called mycotoxins that are found in the spoiled grains or beans can cause preterm losses of babies during pregnancy. Here's where having a variant or unusual gene for PAH gene causes PKU when you have 2 copies, but having a copy of that gene that's linked to PKU may have given pregnant women a survival advantage there, as Withrock and other scientists have noted. Pregnant people who are PKU carriers have lower risks of spontaneous abortions from mold toxins. This may have ensured their next generation's survival during times of epic famine. Science historians expect this selective benefit may be why PKU is still found and genes for PKU are still found in the human genome in populations all around the world. The scourge of famine still plagues the world, and history is likely to repeat itself. I passed on a gene that's linked to PKU, a PAH gene that can cause PKU to my daughters. That's true. But in doing this, I also gave my next generation a gene that may have allowed my family to survive famines over millennia. It was probably carried by my female Celtic ancestors from Scotland and Ireland, and by those who made their way north to Scandinavia. I'm proud to carry it on, so call me a survivor. And I'll take a pause here and just ask if there's, see if there's any questions that have come in the interim. Yes, someone commented, it's exciting that there's a positive to my unique DNA. Yeah, you know, that's true. And it's kind of odd that we never hear about it, because often when one hears in genetics about the rare health conditions, one does not also learn at the same time as a geneticist or a clinician about the positives, about the role in evolution throughout history. So actually, throughout evolutionary time, surviving as a human species, we were able to do that and to survive and be here. Unlike the dinosaurs who died out, we're still here partly because of these rare genes that allowed us to survive these really catastrophic, epic, cataclysmic situations that occur over and over throughout history. So it's kind of short-sighted to think, well, we'll take the eugenics view and medically and say, we're going to just keep all the perfect genes that we know how they function and disregard those genes that we don't really understand how they work, because those may have been what allowed us to survive. And in the future, when things happen again, we may need all those things. So it's like kind of short-sighted to think of culling out or removing from the genome those things that actually are helping us survive. Yeah. So I don't know why people don't talk about the benefits of the rare genes over time, but I do think it's an interesting question, and one that I'd like to have come up more during, say, medical education, or even counseling for newborn screening when a family receives a diagnosis. It would be nice to hear, like, yes, you have this rare condition, and if it's treatable, how it's treatable, and then if it had an important role, I think mentioning that it puts it in a kind of a different light. Yeah. So I wanted to mention also that when we think about our genes and someone says, oh, you have a gene for this or that condition, possibly after they've done genetic testing, I think it's important to consider that the gene spectrum goes along a continuum. So it goes from having extra copies of a gene to having a highly functional gene to a partially active gene, or one that isn't working at all or is silent, or perhaps a missing gene. It can have a deletion. And each variant has a slightly different DNA sequence. All of them may accumulate new mutations at any time, little by little, every time a cell divides. That's the nature of genes. In addition, how any one gene works is affected by and shaped by more than the physical baseline of its DNA sequence. So if a person gets DNA testing and they're told what they have, well, it's also affected by other things. Over time, a gene can turn on and be activated, or it can be turned off and silenced. This can happen because of other genes or oncogenes or transposons or viruses or chemicals in the environment, stress, even prescription drugs or recreational drugs, even our food, as with PKU, our food influences how that gene works. So it's the stuff of day-to-day life that affects how our genes work, and whether any particular gene is going to be beneficial or harmful will depend on the situation the person finds themselves in at the moment. And I wanted to bring that up in particular because that's where the infectious diseases and famines come into it, is that it's because we're in a certain environment now where many of us have enough food and are not affected by cholera or malaria, we don't see the value or importance or function of the gene in those circumstances. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's important to value our diversity and to understand that Mother Nature loves diversity, and she works with it every day to create evolution and lives that are able to survive. So it's a good thing to remember. So I'm going to check back into the other chat. Okay, that one is still going. So I wanted to again thank everyone for the opportunity to share about survival genes. And if you have a chance to look at the book, it's When the Baby Is Not Okay, Hopes and Genes. And the title Hopes and Genes does reflect that kind of view I have, where, our genetics is something that's both something to deal with and something to understand, appreciate, and honor. So thanks for joining, and thanks for CAN PKU again for the opportunity to be here with you guys. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.